I won't delay any further. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, the Chief Executive Officer of the North Queensland Cowboys, Mr. Greg Toner. Greg has worked with companies such as Coopers and Lybrand, Walt Disney, Oracle, Telstra, Optus, and now the Queensland Toyota Cowboys. Since taking over as the Cowboys CEO in May 2015, Greg has overseen a golden period for the club, including winning the National Rugby League Premiership in 2015 and runners-up in 2017. Greg, it's a great opportunity to have you live from Cowboys country today, and without further ado, I'll ask you to commence your presentation. Thanks, Greg.
I love the fact that this is called the Cove presentation, and when I asked the people who asked me to speak what it meant, their eyes lit up, because it really they talked about the birth of the Australian Army. And one of my beliefs and what I've seen everywhere through my experience is success is forged in hard moments, in hard times. Of all the business leaders and individuals who I've met in my lifetime who have achieved greatness, they have one common story. And that story is they are at a point before they found success where they were tested beyond anything. Whether it was on the verge of bankruptcy, when they were told they'd never make it, and they persevered and they found a way. So success is forged. It's not granted. You have to really, really want it. Then the other point I want to make is that every role in a team is as important as the other. When you look at the great stories in the world, it's the common person who finds a way not to give up to achieve the goal. But if you look behind them, for them to get there, they've been surrounded by leadership and care that gave them something deep in their heart that they would find selflessness to go above and beyond to do something. And every major story in history, in every culture, it is common. Somebody who wants to give more, supported by care or love, who found something more important than themselves. Which brings me to the next one. I believe teams' greatness is measured in what you do for others. It's what makes the difference. Last year, we had a group of US Marines visit us in Townsville. They've been up at the high range doing sniper practice. We had them drop in and we gave them a strength and conditioning. And we had their lieutenant and sergeant join us at our team lunch. We have a team lunch the day before we play. I've got a team lunch today before we play tomorrow night. And the lieutenant spoke, and he was fantastic. And he talked about Spartans, he talked about team. And this was the Marine group that gets dropped in first anywhere in the world. And there was one question that he was asked by a player at the moment, and that was, how or why do you do this? And he said, I love my country, but when I'm out there, we do it for each other, for the person on the right and the person on the left. And that really resonated to me, and it resonated to our team, because then we come to the Cowboys' performance last year. One of the proudest moments I've ever been involved in, to see a group of young men step up for each other and get results. And the last point I want to make about the Cowboys and high performance is the season starts again. That it doesn't stay, it's just for the moment. And the competition lifts and you have to stay ahead. You've got to keep working to go ahead. And you see changes in personnel. You see changes all over the shop, but you've got to keep the culture building. We saw in 16, after we played in 15, that every team on average lifted between 10 and 15% on their performance when they played us. So when you're at the top, people even work harder to get you. And so that's sort of where we are. Just moving forward now, I want to talk about what are the key elements of a high performance team and culture. I've broken into three parts. Part A, you've got to have this greater purpose, a vision and belief. It has to be something greater than yourself. And that's where you got to start. There's no point of having B, strategy, structure, clear responsibilities, if you don't have A. Right, but if you've got A, right, and you've got a greater purpose and a vision, you've got something special. And it doesn't need to be complicated. You can simply do it for your mates, for your family, to make the world a better place. But I can tell you what it's not. It's not about dollars and money, and it's definitely not about power, because that's not sustainable. And those people and those organisations have found out. When I get to B, you need this. It's essential to keep you going to make it work, but it won't score you the try. It will not win you a grand final. But then we come to part C that will, and that's talent. And I'm not talking about natural talent. I'm talking about a committed and well-trained people. Remember the saying, an amateur does something to get it right. A professional does something till they can't get it wrong. Well, in high performance culture, you do it until you are better than everyone else. And that's elite sport, and it's definitely what it is, defending our country. And the comment at the bottom of that slide is empowered talent is a distinctive advantage. And it is in everything I've seen. Now, what I've done going forward, before I go to the next slide, is I've broken up this high performance team and culture into two areas. One, the individual. Because of being a part of a team, you have to do your job to the best of your abilities. And then the second part is about team. And in team, I'm going to focus on leadership because they're essential. So in summary, it's about every individual giving everything they've got. And the second part is having leaders helping them bring the best out of each other. So going forward, we're going to start at individuals, and you see the slide. And you look at the principles: desire to be the best, challenging self, accountability, selflessness. Well, that's Jonathan Thurston. I remember in 2015 when JT and some others returned from Origin, and we had a 3-day turnaround before the next game. And you know, JT plays at the front line. He takes a lot of hits. And I went out at the beginning of training to see how they were going, and there were our leaders who'd come back from Origin leading training. I thought to myself, that's impressive. And I came back in about an hour and a half later, and they just finished training. And guess who was the one person out there practicing his kicks? JT, committed like nobody else, leading from the front. The quote at the bottom of this page, high performance is found in the moment, is probably one of the biggest lessons in my personal life about driving high performance. And if you look back in your history, when you achieved something great, when you did something, you were in the moment, you will notice that all your energy, all your intent is in what you're doing in that instance. And if you look at times when things didn't go right, you were probably thinking about something in the past or worried about something in the future, but you weren't present in the moment. So that's not high performance. High performance is being in the moment, which comes back to the Cowboys last year, right? We had one of our most challenging years in injuries, and on the corporate side, you could ever dream up. We got tested big time. And when I reflected about today, there were two things in the year that really stood out for me. One was the coach. It was about midnight here in Towns. We were in our leagues club, and we go back there to have dinner after the game. By the time we get there, it's about 11:30 or midnight, and the players come in, and we come down and we do a presentation because the games are late. It was about 2.5 hours, and I arrived, and Paul was sitting there by himself, and I went up and asked him how he's going, and we were hurting. You live this on your sleeve and your heart every day. I said, how are you going? He looked at me and he said to me, it's an opportunity, GT. I just need to adjust my strategies for the players we have. And I can tell you, like I have now, I had a wave of goosebumps over me, and I thought, you're our man. And the level of being forged, you thought greater than yourself about winning and losing, and thinking, well, this is an opportunity. We've worked hard. We've created a good squad. I'm just going to adjust my strategy to bring the best out of the people around me. That was phenomenal. And the second part is what we did as an organisation. And things weren't working. And we brought everybody's focus back to the moment, back to the instance. And our GM of football summed it up perfectly, Peter, right? Let's do it one day at a time. Let's take the past and the future and take it out. Let's block it. Let's do one training at a time. Let's do one tackle. Let's do one run-up. And we did that on the corporate business. Let's just, in IT, marketing, sales, membership, game day, let's do it one task at the moment. But let's do that task as best as we can, to the best of our abilities. And it made a huge difference. And I think they're the winning principles of an individual. And if we can be focused in the moment and we can get outcomes, it's huge. Now let's move. We're going to move now. I'm not going to go to the next slide next, but I want to talk to you about, let's move into leadership, right? And when I look at big organisations, and I've worked for global big organisations all over the world. I lived abroad for over 10 years and worked for global companies. When you look at high performance from a business perspective, you centre on points in the leadership structure that have the greatest risk. And that risk area is where what I would call the rubber hits the road. where the strategy has to turn into actions, right? And because this is the area where you really lose or win. And if you monitor that, that is the difference that makes the difference, right? No, I'm just listening. And in large organizations, there's two levels of what I call starting level of management, right? The first one is the first strategic role of management, where you have to be responsible for planning and for doing. The second one is the floor manager, and where you have to be focused on delivering. And the characteristics of these two ones are quite interesting. So that first strategic management role generally have lots of education, but limited experience. And it comes with degrees and masters and MBAs, and sometimes a lot of really overdeveloped ambition, right? And then the other one, the floor manager, comes with the complete opposite. Lots of experience, but in a lot of cases, limited training in the business, or limited training. And they come from the team they were in. What's interesting about these two roles and their performance, they have the greatest impact, which I mentioned. So if they get it right, it's going to affect the board, the CEO, the exec team about if they win or lose. Likewise, the lowest level, if they get it right or wrong, it's going to affect the team they look after directly. Whether that's in pride, whether that's in bonuses, whether it's in, so they're really, really strong. And when I look at the last 3 years and I apply that thinking across the Army organisation that I've been learning a lot about, I see two roles that are very, very similar. I see that floor manager stepping out of the team as that corporal. That's what it is. Heaps of experience, but it's got to step up in the leadership, and it's got to then manage their peers. And then I see the other one being the lieutenants, right? They come out of officer school, out of degrees, and they get put straight in to that lieutenant role. And they have to face challenges. And so where I'd like to finish my speech today is talking about these two leaders. And I've mentioned the risks, about less experience, less training, they've got to lead teams. The greatest opportunity, because the faster these people develop, the faster the organisation will move forward, and the less risk. And it's a distinctive advantage. But the big one on this slide is that word responsibility. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. But we're all affected by those two roles every day in our performance. And it's our responsibility, no matter whether you're at the trainee at the bottom at recruit level, or you're sitting at general with 3 stars, our responsibility, if we can help those two roles succeed, the organisation will go forward, and we all need to personally own it. And I put down the bottom, this is where games and battles are won at these two roles, because all plays pass through these two people. So I'm going to start with the corporals, and I'm going to share just quickly what I think the success factor of that role for that floor leader who really has to get the team to do things, and what's the biggest challenges when you move into that role. And I want to share that with you because we all have, as I've said, the responsibility to help them succeed, because their success affects all of us. So if I look at success, well, you want a leader in that sort of junior leadership role. You want to be able to trust them. And to be able to trust them, you have to see their ability to take direction or the vision or the intent and turn it into action that generates results. Right? They have to have time for their teams. And by that, they have to know their people, care for them, get the best out of them while they get the outcomes. And I think it's about they need to know each member's personal makeup, their personal life, what makes them tick, and where to help. And I see leaders who get things done, they do that very, very well. And what you see demonstrated then is what you see is what I would call the 2%ers. And I've heard people say 1%, 2%, 5%. It's irrelevant. It's the little things. And how do you see it? You see it is that they look sharp, they're on time, they're prepared, they clean up, they get there early, they look after each other, and there's a real positive energy around them. And it's very noticeable when you visit a lot of offices, and I've had the privilege in my senior roles to go out to a lot of businesses and my own internal teams that I've had the privilege of being part of, and you can feel very quickly what's going on, and that's success. If I come to challenges, I've really put 3 on the slide. The number 1 is team, stepping out, being part of the club to leading the club, you know, stepping out from teams. And what no one tells you when you take this role on, that it's just not a new role, it's a life change. Because no longer can you be one of the team, you know, you can be one of the group. You have to lead the group. You know, now your time is about others. Your success is going to keep your old mates successful, in some cases alive. I've heard the quote, leadership versus likership, banded around, and there's a lot of acronyms on it. But the move is very important, right? And because no one tells you when you take on a leadership role that when you start, it feels horrible, right? And for the next 4 sets of 6 months, from my experience, it's going to be really hard to find your feet and rechange your energy and leadership. And the first 3 months, you're going to lose a lot of bark and a lot of pride, because you're going to have to stand up for what you believe in. And the funny thing I was reflecting on is that often when you get announced, you come in front of the group and there's a clap of, you know, celebration, and then all of a sudden life gets really hard. Life gets turned up on its head. So my bit of experience to share with you, when people clap you for something you haven't done, you should have alarm bells ringing really loud, because you're about to go into your own forging. I also wanted to talk now about these feelings, and I've seen this in leaders, and I think a lot of people, when they think they take a leadership role, they take on glory, when actually it's the complete opposite. And it's really, really hard, because you have to, you know, your job is to challenge people to their best. You are responsible. If you don't take accountability of their performance and take it personally, then your unit's going to fail, right? You have to be fair and consistent. You've got to fight your biases, who's your friend and who wasn't your friend in the past. You have to be fair and consistent in everything you do. And the funny thing about it, the buck stops and starts with you, right? And if you get it wrong, you're going to get smacked. If you get it right, it's your team. So become selfless. You don't go home until it has to be packed up, and you have to be there first. But the positive, I don't want to be too negative about it, is that it does pass. And if you are brave enough to step up on accountability and humble enough to lead by example and listen, there'll come a point when you've seen the people you've challenged and the people you've held accountable who've absolutely hated you for it, they will lift to a new level individually, and your team will lift for a new level. And that reward is the Gatorade that drives energies. And that's what it's about. And so there's a lot in that one, but it's so key. And I've seen so many people make the mistake of putting their friends first and get hurt and losing why they got the job. Because to get picked off the floor, you do have talent, but you leave it, you move to a different way of life. Now, the second one I want to talk about is boss, the confidence to speak up. We look as leaders for the people on those floors, and I make a beehive in all the organizations I've worked in and all the organizations I've had to connect to as partners, to those leaders, because at that level you can see what's going on. There's no secrets at that level. And so your boss needs you to have the confidence to speak up and let them know what's going on and give them feedback. And then the last one I think is really, really important. The job of a leader is to support their team, but it's also to support the leadership above them. It's the way it cycles through. And the way I've summarized this slide is, I think the corporal success for the team that they're responsible is to be accountable for their performance. And in football terms, it's to keep the ball and the play moving forward up the field. Right, that's the job of the corporal. If I now move to the lieutenant success and challenges, right? Oh, no, sorry, I just want to go back. The best challenge, the best example of the Cowboys around the corporal last year, I think, was Michael Morgan, right? Michael, at the beginning of last year, and I can tell you this in Chatham House rules, you know, the football department asked him to become more of a leader, to develop, and he's been on a leadership program for here for a couple of years. And I saw instantly at the start of the season, because I try and get to the bus first because I want to lead by example, and Michael starts turning up the bus first. This is like ridiculous hours in the morning, like 3:30, 4:30. They're not social hours. And then I noticed when things weren't working or people were missing, he just went and fixed it. And I noticed this improved during the year because he's comes across as quite a shy man. And then all of a sudden, he's leading a group of players, 13 of them start their diploma in business and hospitality. And even during the final, they kept basically those training meetings up. And then this year, I get called into a meeting. They, as part of their study, they have to do a project. They've decided to pick 6 charities and do a fundraiser. And he sat in the middle of that and led it. It's really important. But I also saw him come back when things got really hard from Origin. And he did what he saw JT did. He stood up and went to training. He led the training when his body was as sore as anything. And then he played some of his best games after Origin. That's a test of leadership in our sport, right? And he struggled a couple of months before that when he was learning leadership and trying to play well. And then when it came to the finals, he led us and he played magnificently. And I think he's an example for us that would represent that young leader being asked to step up and going through that horrible forging moment to find his place to be a leader and play well. It's very unique. We'll jump on now to lieutenants and successors, and stay with me. We've only got this is the second last slide. So this person has a lot of learning, but they arrive with limited experience. And they join a team that's got a lot more experience than they have. And how will they be measured in success? Well, I think it's by living their truth. You know, you do what you say, your word, your bond. You can learn quickly, take feedback, you can listen, you can adjust and move, you can be dynamic. From a team perspective, you can see that the lieutenant knows their team and knows how to support them to be successful. And you can see they're always watching to try and make sure the team's looked after. There's a factor of care. It's a personal connection. And the last one you look for as a leader and your young strategic leaders is they're bringing you ideas. They're creating solutions. You can see their mind working on how to do it better. And they've got the confidence and the respect to put their ideas up and away. That's when you know a lieutenant or a junior leader in strategy is ready for the next way to go. But like all of us, whether you're at the top or you're starting out, you've got to manage your fears. And I think in a lot of ways, the fears of a young lieutenant coming in are really, really hard and probably daunting. And because they come to a place being trained to have ideas, they've got plans, but they're told to lead. And it can be very scary to be around people subconsciously who you might think know more than you. And what you often see in these young leaders, they get overwhelmed with fear that then affects their behavior. And they move into this horrible model of telling, you've got to do it my way. And then there's some resentment hits them. And then they justify these stories in their head. They're just trying to get me, that, you know, but all you're really seeing is they're under stress and they've got fear. Yet if you think about it, if these young lieutenants stepped back and they looked at the team they were picking up to lead, and they realized how many other young lieutenants that team had helped learn, they'd probably relax a little bit. Because the secret of leadership is not knowing something is only a weakness when you don't know that. I'll say it again, not knowing something is only a weakness when you don't know that. And the secret of leadership is to bring stuff out, which is the next point here, is the definition of leadership. We're running through a lot of new leaders now, lifting the business, pushing people up. And what I'm watching, and as I reflected on this, I've seen it in myself coming through over the many years, and I've seen it in others, is you seem to arrive at a leadership role, even though you've had lots of training, but you arrive with this perception of what leadership is. I think it's based on TV, right? I don't know where it comes from, but you think success is you being at the front with your chest out 10 foot tall, that you have to find the problems, you then come up with the plans to fix it yourself, then you go and fix it yourself, and you prove that you're better than everyone else. You think that that's leadership. You've got to be smarter, clever, and do more, when in fact, it's not leadership. Understanding the vision and goal and capturing all the experiences and empowering an initiative around you, that's leadership. right? Your job is to get to the end. And when you look at sport, right, and you look at our top captains, yeah, they're generally really good players because they've got to sustain leadership and performance on the field, but they don't score the most tries normally. They don't make the most tackles. They don't kick the most balls, right? What they do is they make sure the ball goes to the right place. They make sure when things are getting hard, they go to the front and center. They turn up beside the person struggling, or they just happen to be in the gap where the hole was to make the tackle, or be in the gap to take the ball and get through to pass to somebody else. Because captains are about their teams, not themselves. And that's where we can come. The next one I want to talk about is really, really big, and that's respect. And I mentioned earlier, and we're coming to the end, that respect is the ability to listen. The story here is when we were opening the house 18 months ago for the Indigenous boys, I had to go to a lot of Indigenous communities, which I've been to before, and I wanted to really try and connect to the community and the elders in particular to understand the cultural connection. Because these boys coming to us is to keep their culture connection, but give them a way to operate that culture connection in the new world. And when I went and saw this psychologist, Clint, on the Gold Coast, and I told him this, he gave me this advice, and this is something that's really staying with me. He said, no matter what you think of the elder, no matter what you think of the elder, the person, what they turn up, what they look for, they might have done some really terrible things, right? When you meet them, if the thought in your mind is, what can I learn? What can this person teach me? He said, that is the cultural connection you need, because they will sense that you respect them and that you've come to learn. And I think often as a leader, if we start a meeting based on what we can learn, because everybody teaches you is really, really important. And I thought that was really important. I've used that, and it helps. It helps settle as you navigate, the lot of energy that goes with leadership. The last one here is transparency. Always tell the truth. And you can see leaders who are struggling and nervous because you can't hide it. You know it ahead of yourself. You know it ahead of your boss. And I want to share this with you as we get towards the end. And the way I see the world, if you listen, seek input, then have a go, and it doesn't work, and you're humble enough to go back and work out why it doesn't work, then that's a powerful lesson. And as a boss, there's nothing better than seeing people make powerful lessons. That's empowerment, right? That's what we look for in our leaders. But if you don't listen and then go and do something and make a mistake and don't learn or review and take feedback, that doesn't become a lesson. That becomes a mistake, and people don't like mistakes. It's really, really important. And especially in elite sport, there isn't time for mistakes. There's time for learnings. Mistakes hurt the team, they hurt the club. In a lot of cases, that's there. And then what I've done at the bottom, the difference between the corporate and lieutenant is the lieutenant, or that strategic leader, that young strategic leader, is you're accountable for winning, getting the team into a scoring position more times than the opposition. The corporal keeps the team going forward, but you have to get the team to the try line. And if you both do your jobs together, you will score more jobs. And that's sort of where we are. And we move to questions. So well done. But before we start, and I'm just going to shift back to camera, I do want to ask you to do something for me that's really important. And that is, having spent a lot of time to get the messages right for you today, what I felt and saw, and the lesson for me personally for these young leaders, is that we all have a direct effect on their performance, which has a direct effect on us and our business. So I'd like you to just take a couple of minutes now to pull out your notebooks, and I know you have them because I see them. I've got 7 of the army with me in my office here. I'd like you to write out what's the one thing you can do to help the lieutenant in your life and the corporal. Please write one thing. And by the way, it's not advice. It is physically doing something that's going to help them in their job, and that in turn is going to help you, and it's going to help the army. Just one thing. Think about it. I'm watching everyone in this room. I'll be asking for yours when we leave. So you're on notice. It's the joy of being in the room. They've been a very good audience here. Just take a minute. It's a very simple thing. It might be turning up early. It might be helping them with something that they know they have to get done. It might be enabling them by you doing that to have some time. Really, really important. And so with that, I've thrown on the questions and I'm going to throw over to Ken. Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Greg. Just for the broader audience, Greg allowed half a dozen soldiers from the local 3RAR into his office to watch how the CoveTalks are conducted and to join him in his presentation live today. Greg, we've had a number of questions come in and I'll get straight into them while the audience is jotting down that one point for you. The first question is from Private Adam McNaughton from 3RAR. Adam. The question is, setting team goals is a critical part of a high-performance culture. How do you achieve a balance between benchmarking against other teams and setting realistic and achievable goals?
Okay. Adam, I think, as a leader, the word is fairness. And I think in setting strategic goals or outcomes, no matter at what level, it comes from the purpose. And why the purpose is really important, that means it comes from within. And I think the challenge of being a leader is that we're asked to strive to be better. And I said elite sport, which I think is Army, is it's just not getting it right. It's about being better than everyone else. So the hardest thing is to set the goals that are at the right level, that have stretched you to the limit. And often when you start the process as a leader, and definitely in my sales experience, when I got my numbers, I felt sick. So often the way I interpret goals is that I work really hard to find fairness, but I know myself that I'm a bit agitated when I get them because I know that I have to do more than I'm doing now. And I think that's the toughest. And people say they're not realistic. And, we've had 3 years here, they said it wasn't realistic. Well, we've beat them every time. And so I think the strength of a leader and a team, my message to all of our people is back yourself, have a go, swing the bat as hard as you can.
Thanks, Greg. Our next question is from Corporal Darren Shaw, and he's from 16 Air Land Regiment in South Australia. Corporal Shaw asks, how is discipline maintained whilst keeping morale high throughout a rigorous season?
Oh, really good question, Darren. I think it's because the leaders lead. They're there early, they're there at the end, they're everywhere. And I think that the greater the leaders do what they say and live what they say, the more people follow. And I think when things get really hard, and we see it in rugby league, like Matt Scott, our Senate prop, you watch him. I've seen him play with, 4 days after getting plates in his fingers, and he just comes in the middle and he keeps driving. And every time he does that, if you watch the players beside him, they get this huge lift of energy. And we saw it with JT and the Broncos the other night, and we lost, we hit a post and we lost at the end. But to see him at the end lift himself, and you can just see that the players lift with him. And I think the way to do that, Darren, is to lead by doing and by showing. And what you find is people will select in, not out.
Thanks, Greg. Next question is from another one from Townsville, which is Warrant Officer Dan Narocki from 2RAR here at Laverack Barracks. His question is, how would you deal with a high performer that individually excels but fails to build on a positive team culture or didn't conform to community expectations? How do you manage the collective when the best performer is not a team player, or is what more important is not keeping the team strong?
Yeah, Dan, that's a really good one. And when we did our value sessions, I think Paul Green summed it up, is you set the parameters of behaviour and respect around your values. And if people can't live within that, they can't stay. And if everyone leads by those values, that person will feel isolated and they will probably check out. But likewise, as a leader, they're the parameters. And this is where we get tested in sport all the time. It's if you play a good player that's not in the parameters, then you will lose. And so as a leader, we're responsible for accountability. And it's really hard, because if you get rid of your best player, you might lose. But I tell you what, you'll have a better team, and individuals don't make teams win.
Thanks, Greg. Our next question is from Lieutenant Richardson at 3RR in Townsville. He asks, injury and rehabilitation is a prevalent aspect in both our fields. As someone in your position, how does your organisation deal with these training setbacks? And if unsuccessful, what is in place to help players transition outside of sport?
Okay, two questions there. That's, what are we doing to make sure our players can sustain their performance? Well, we invest in sports science and technology and IP, and we've had a great success, believe it or not, even after last year. Over the last 6 or 7 years, we've dramatically reduced our knee and shoulder injuries, and we've done that by really analysing and changing the way we train and develop people. And I think innovation and investment into sports science can make a huge difference, and I think that's where we want to go. And we are talking to the Army about that as well, but that's where you've got to focus and invest, because keeping people going in a combat sport is unbelievable, and that's what rugby league is. In relation to post career, because it's a very short time, there's a couple of things. The NRL's research for us shows that our top players do 3 things. One, they've got a great attitude, and they have that attitude at training and when they play. Second thing they do is they actually are always looking at developing their career. They're looking at what's going to come next. And it's funny, it's not necessarily doing it, but it's actually exploring it, because it gives you hope and confidence. You know where you're going. And the third thing, which is really fundamental in a sport where you can be at the top of the pillar one moment and at the bottom next because of injury, and that is giving back to the community, giving some time to give some love somewhere else. Because when you do something for someone else, it generates these hormones, and those hormones, or within your body, they stop depression. So if you get a regular cycle of giving time and doing something for someone else, when you can't train and you do that, it'll keep you balanced. So they're the 3: attitude, looking about what you're going to do next and keep learning or keep experimenting. And the third one is giving back to your community, doing something for someone else, something greater than yourself.
Thank you, Greg. Now, Lex, our next question is from Headquarters Fire Brigade in Sydney, and this is Lieutenant Steed. As an organisation, Defence is seeking to increase diversity. In your opinion, how important is diversity in high-performance teams?
I think really, really important. The Cowboys International Women's Day hosted a lunch, and I organised personally, the CEOs, predominantly male organisations, to partner with the only non-profit Business Women's Circle to bring a really strong leader, a female leader. And we found Kath Mackay, who represents Australia at the UN for Women, who's led a lot of things and worked with Defence, because we wanted a business lunch in North Queensland that showed the value of diversity. I had the privilege many years ago when I was at Telstra under David Thodey, where he made every male middle manager go through a 6-hour course, 3 hours on videos and 3 hours in rooms. And what they showed us were firstly the statistics, that when you have gender equality and you have men and women in the room, that your productivity and your outcome goes through the roof. The other thing they taught us as male leaders was that women operate differently, and that, for instance, a man will have a 5-second thought and he'll share it, while a woman may wait till she has it 100% right. Men are more prevalent to network, while women are probably a little bit held back. And so the object of leadership was to grow Telstra's leadership and gender diversity by working with the predominantly male management to develop women. And the results around the world are just staggering. And I think if we're going to have a world in Australia where we want to innovate and stay relevant globally, we're going to have complete diversity. And likewise, it's also culturally. And definitely going into a generational shift, which happens every couple of 100 years. We have the Industrial Revolution, we're now in digital. It's the diversity of age, it's diversity of gender, and it's the diversity of culture that will make the biggest result to our productivity and for Australia to be the best it can be. So I believe in it, really, big time.
Thanks again, Greg. One more question out of South Australia. Bombardier Baron is at the 16 Air Land Regiment in South Australia. His question is, when a player is injured, retires or moves to another club, it often leaves a skill shortage within the team, particularly if younger and less experienced players are utilised by the club to replace them. Units within an army sometimes experience a similar skill shortage when the experienced and the uniquely skilled soldiers post to other units. Can you name any specific techniques that you as the CEO use to maintain the collective skill set of the team where there is regular turnover of personnel within that team?
Yeah, so Bombardier, it's called succession planning. And I think from a Cowboys perspective, we've had a big one, the elephant in the room. What happens to the Cowboys after JT? And, you know, from a club perspective, we're very proud of what our GM of football, Peter's done, our coach, Paul, is over the last 4 years, we've developed, you know, 4 levels of leadership, developing all the time the team, because a team is greater than an individual. And I think in corporate, what you're continually doing is you're running succession, definitely in big places of you know, 1, 2, and 3, and that you're looking to develop those people continually and to get them to create the aspiration to go forward. And in our football department, and I'll come back there because that's probably the most exciting, the coach is about winning the season and winning the next game. Our GM of football, their role is to make sure that we have enough talent in our elite pathway, starting at under 14, coming through every year, that within our squad of 30 plus the 6 development, that we have talent in all positions that's training in the squad of 36 now. And we take 17 away. And so the object is to keep building up all the time. And I think it's one thing that's amazed me about the Army. They rotate all of you through roles so quickly, definitely in the offices, and every 2 years. And your organisation's about that movement and resilience is amazing. And, you know, Bombardier, that's why when I looked at the task I was given today, the corporate and lieutenant always seem to be your starting points of future leaders. And I think you do it well. But when you get a situation where that happens, because maybe you lose 2 or 3 players in the same position, you don't have one, I think that becomes a forging moment. And often, you know, my history in the world, even with the best planning, and I like to plan, is something's gone wrong. And when I look back 6 months later, it was the world telling me to think differently. It was saying I didn't have it right. And so what I trigger now when I've tried really hard to do something that doesn't work is to get a different opinion and look for different people to do different roles. And I generally look back 6 months later and we're in a better situation. It can be a bit nerve-wracking when it's happening and a bit painful, but that's sort of my experience. I hope that helps.
Greg, thanks again for that. It's come to that time. I'll start to close down the Cove Talk for today. We've still got a few questions, but we usually wrap up at about this time. So appreciate the questions from the audience across Army. Greg, on behalf of the Director General of Training and Doctrine and everyone that's attended today's presentation, we'd certainly like to thank you very much for your time and your preparation for today's presentation. No doubt there'll be a lot of discussion around the messes and the certain venues across Army, which will be terrific on the subject of leadership and down to the section commander, platoon commander level. Greg, before we close off the broadcast, is there any final words for the audience today? Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for the opportunity. We're very proud, the Cowboys, to be associated with the Australian Army and Defence within North Queensland. The only thought to leave you with is that if everybody in this call did one thing to help the lieutenant and corporal in their world, imagine the large shift that could be achieved. Because life is not a half a head count for a year, it's about fixing something straight away. And I hope that passion came through today. So thank you.
Thanks very much for your time today, Greg. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attendance. Look forward to hearing your feedback, which you can send to the Cove team via their email, which is soldiercove@gmail.com. Or if you go to the Cove website, you'll find the contribute to the Cove button there, and that'll formulate an email, and you can send your feedback or ideas for future content for the Cove. Today's broadcast will also be recorded and prepared to upload to the Cove at a later stage. Our next Cove Talk will be on Thursday, the 26th of April. The presenter will be Wing Commander Ben Cullen. He'll be talking about interagency operations in the context of Operation Southern Discovery, which is the ADF support to Australian Antarctic Division operations. More details will be available about that next Cove Talk after the Easter weekend. Greg, thank you very much again. Thanks to the audience across Australia. Thank you to the Cove team. Everybody have a great Easter and good soldiering. Bye for now.